I think whenever you're ready, you can go ahead, Brian.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you to this webinar with the affordable housing professionals. I'm a small affordable housing developer and on the board of the organization and the program chair. And we're excited to have a great panel this morning. The affordable housing professionals is a voice for affordable housing in the state of New Jersey and promotes advocacy and dialogue and education. And the panel today includes a great group of folks, and we're going to talk about different development, finance, and planning changes post-pandemic. The panelists we have, and I'm excited, Larry Regan, who's the president of Regan Development Corporation. He's also my cousin and the reason I'm in this business, so this is pretty exciting for me. Kimmel Cameron, who's the senior vice president of Hudson Housing Capital, who is a syndicator of affordable housing. Sue Taylor, who is vice president of TD Bank, helps on the lending side, and Erin Stankiewicz, who's a planner with CGP&H. And now I'm going to turn it over to the moderator of today's panel, Samantha Hennessey.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our wonderful panel today. This is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I joined Affordable Housing Professionals of New Jersey right before the pandemic struck. So I was very lucky to sort of go through that whole pandemic with our organization and have a very broad view of what does that mean for a nonprofit organization. And as an affordable housing developer myself, boots on the ground, what are the changes that we've seen over the last few years? And as we come out of this pandemic, we hear a lot of folks say the new normal, right? What does that mean, the new normal after the pandemic? And the folks that we have on our panel today are also boots on the ground, folks in our industry that have been through this pandemic and have seen the changes, experienced them, and are coming through on the other side. So I'm going to actually start with some questions for our panelists, one at a time. And if folks want to, put questions into the chat, we can answer those questions, but we will have time at the end to, sort of dive into any questions that you have. And I think the conversation we spur on this panel hopefully will open you guys up to, ask those questions because the wealth of knowledge on this panel and the depth of professionalism is great. So the first question I do have is actually for Erin. And I think Brian did a good job of introducing Erin. Erin is with CGP&H. She has a planning background and has been working with a myriad of towns through their affordable housing obligations and planning for them before the pandemic, and then working with these towns as they're trying to fulfill these obligations during the pandemic. And again, now that we're sort of through the other side, Erin, what have you seen before, during, and after? Can you speak to what the town's obligations were before? Were they working on them? Did they get a stop because of the pandemic? And what are you seeing now?
Yeah, well, thanks, Samantha. Happy to be here with all of you today. From before the pandemic, we did see, everybody's been working as hard as they can with our municipal clients. Towns are committed to their obligations and working to achieve what they need to do and what they've promised. During the pandemic, obviously, nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody knew about supply chain issues. Nobody knew about staffing issues. That's across the board. So now that we've gone through everything, we've definitely seen people in towns, developers working together, working harder. The 2025 is the deadline for round 3. So that's coming up quick. So we've definitely seen people doubling down, being more committed to getting these projects off the ground and completed. You know, there's been issues with, you know, as I said, with supply chain, getting the projects done, but we've seen more commitment from the state level. And I know some of you are going to touch on the gap funding and other commitments for townships with their affordable housing trust funds. So we've definitely seen more commitment through that funding.
Are you seeing, and I've reviewed numerous settlement agreements, the projects that are in settlement agreements, are you finding the ones that are getting completed, the tax credit projects or supportive housing projects, group homes, or I've seen also in some settlement agreements, a market to affordable program. What are you seeing actually of the projects that are in settlement agreements actually get done?
Most of the time, I mean, like you said, the tax credit projects, because of the gap funding, there's been a big push to get those completed, and that's been a big help. A lot of the inclusionary projects are getting done, mostly because there's more private funding available to these developers, and because of the end of round 3 for the affordable housing obligations, the townships are more committed to making sure that those projects get completed overall.
Okay. And do you, from a compliance perspective, what are you seeing? How are towns sort of complying with the marketability of these projects? Are the developers, are they focused on the developers, making sure that they're meeting all their affordable housing obligations for marketing? Or do the towns sort of work with folks like your organization that then you oversee the developers to ensure that those units are marketed affordably?
Yeah, so each municipality has affirmative marketing plans that they're required to follow. Each development also needs to follow these affirmative marketing plans. So administrative agents such as CGP&H, you know, we work with the developers, we work with the towns to make sure that those marketing obligations are being completed and correctly. We make sure that everything's posted on the New Jersey Housing Resource Center website in compliance with the new rules that have been set up. So, you know, it's definitely part of our process as administrative agents. So we make sure that everyone's able to, you know, get the word out the right way.
Thank you for touching on that, Erin. I appreciate it. So as we talk through the settlement agreements, I know for myself, I have a couple of projects that are part of an obligation, and we are utilizing the HMFA's funding specifically designated for projects that have an obligation through their production funds. Larry, I think that if you could speak also about what your experience has been, you know, pre-pandemic, through the pandemic, and after, to just really talk through your projects and what sort of happened, the ones that you had going on and the pandemic hit, and how did you deal with that?
Sure. Thanks, Samantha. So we've had a number of projects that were awarded 9% tax credit funding pre or just at the pandemic. So and I think there's been a lot of our fellow developers, both not-for-profit and for-profit, that have been in similar situations as what we've had. And it's challenging, and it's like doing a hurdle race where you have to jump over numerous hurdles, because if you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, everything was sort of at a dead standstill. And then, you know, it was tough to get the projects even started. And then, supply chain issues came, just getting deals to a closing table because of the challenges of financing and rising costs. So we had deals that needed to be re-underwritten even before the closing. We had deals that needed to be re-underwritten after the closing. And then after the first wave of COVID cost increases because of the lack of materials, and if we all remember back, the price of wood timber and trusses, I mean, they basically doubled. So the HMFA has been an incredible resource and partner to the development community with deals either stuck that couldn't close, or deals like what we had, deals that were eventually closed and then found themselves in a situation where the first cost increases came and we needed more money to cover these. And we're not market rate to raise our rents just to offset the cost challenges. We're limited by the max rents we can charge under the program. So what that means is we needed help, or these deals couldn't get moving, you know, from a whole affordable housing LIHTC industry-wide in New Jersey and across the country. But the HMFA was able to come to the table with some gap monies to help not only with cost increases, and the legislature provided funding to HMFA to cover some of these gaps, but also the first, I call it a two-wave situation. The first wave was all of the challenges of supply chain and COVID and cost increases during COVID. And then, you know, after that, a year later, interest rates started rising. And that's a challenge for deals that are in construction, because you're closed, and then your interest reserve has a limited amount of money in it. And when your interest rates go from 3.5 to 7.5, your interest reserve over the course of an 18-month construction process, it's over $1 million. If you're doing a typical LIHTC deal of 50 to 80 units, you could have a hole in your interest reserve from over $1 million. So again, the HMFA and the legislature of New Jersey thought carefully, and they provided gap funding to deals that were in such a situation. So without the HMFA, I think a lot of the deals would still either not be started, or they'd be bankrupt, like the deals we had that were in construction. We were able to complete them, and now we're coming to the closing and occupancy of these deals. But we have HMFA to thank for the gap funding that they provided, both in the interest reserve relief as well as in the cost increase relief. So we're grateful to them.
So to touch a little bit upon that, and I think that's where I'm going to put Sue on the spot here as we talk about some interest rates and the reserve. So just so people understand, as you know, we're penciling out these deals many times years in advance. We put our pro formas together, and they have to go through multiple layers of approvals, both from the construction lender and from the tax credit investor syndicator. So when, as you mentioned, Larry, you have deals that, you had, 3% as a rate for construction, and now we're seeing 7-8%. Sue, can you talk to us and our audience about that interest and how that works on, a LIHTC project, why we don't lock a construction, why we don't get a fixed rate when we start construction. And then Larry, you could touch a little bit upon that interest rate reserve and how we are able to work, because I think we're going to see that going forward. I know deals that I am working on currently, I am putting in that interest risk reserve now, because we don't know where this is going to end. So I think that we should be talking a little bit about that. Sue, can you touch on that?
Sure. So as everybody knows, interest rates have, increased so quickly, and it's affecting everyone. But, even going back to how Larry did it, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now. So pre-pandemic, things were pretty normal for a long time. There wasn't a lot of interest rate movement. Rates were generally pretty low. And I think everybody, and that's why people were penciling it out a couple of years in advance what they thought their interest was going to be. And then when the pandemic hit, there was a concern of banks even that, at the time, LIBOR might go negative. So we started putting floors for LIBOR into our language, which was the first time in many, many years that we had done something like that. Now, post-pandemic, we don't have floors anymore now TD is using SOFR, but the reason being is because SOFR has jumped so much. It is something that we're constantly watching. We work with our developers to try to estimate what the interest reserve will be for the entire period, because it's best for the client, it's best for the project. But then, of course, it is hard because you need to fill, an additional source. So we do understand that as rates continue to increase. Typically on construction lending, it's always been a variable rate, and that, there's no real great reason for that. Obviously, with a fixed rate, anybody that has a traditional mortgage right now that locked in a couple of years ago or even 5 years ago, everybody's sitting and thinking, oh, this is great. So banks then, of course, but banks do use the traditional variable rate for construction.
But on a 4% deal, typical 4% deal, it's locked in. So there, if you've had a 4% deal in the same fact patterns going back to COVID, which we've had in New York State, we've gotten the benefit because when you first close, your bonds are locked. It's a fixed construction rate that floats to the perm rate, and it's all phased in. So those deals had the benefit. But I think one thing that I need to add is, like, we're working with TD and Sue's, another arm of TD construction lending. Even with this gap money that the HMFA put in on these deals, or continues to put in, that money will trigger prevailing wage. And most of our deals that we do in the LIHTC community are not prevailing wage deals. But if you use this money that the HMFA has, it triggers prevailing wages. So we've gone back to our construction lenders like Sue and Matt Schatz, who works in North Jersey for TD, and we're working on a deal with them in Little Ferry, and they were able to increase on the fly, went back to committee and increased their construction loan to bridge that additional monies that the HMFA put into all of these gap deals for the interest increase and for the cost increases, because we would have triggered prevailing wages and the deals still would have been shot. So it's a delicate dance with all the players, but I think a lot of the organizations like Kimmel's organization with Hudson and TD and all of the syndicators and the construction lenders that are in LIHTC all have banded together with the HMFA to work together to make developments such as, what we're all doing function in this difficult climate.
And I think that's very important, Larry, and that's been my experience as well. And the Alpert Group has a tremendous relationship with Enterprise. And throughout the past few years with all of these deals and with TD, it's been, let's get together, let's figure this out, right? How do we get these deals closed and moving? And I that has definitely been my experience, whether it's, you're right, having TD sort of gives, increase their construction lending during construction and utilizing the HMFA money as a perm source, so then it doesn't trigger prevailing wage. That's definitely been a huge win for us on a project that we have as well. And Kimmel, I think that I talk about Enterprise, and I've worked with Hudson as well. I think both organizations are two of the best in syndicating the tax credits. And I really thought, a pandemic happens, and I was very scared about LIHTC pricing. And I really thought LIHTC pricing has got to go down from this. This is going to be a catastrophe. Years ago, I'm sure, Larry, you remember in 2008, the pricing took such a dive, and it was very scary. But I haven't seen that, Kimmel. It looks like LIHTC pricing has been pretty good. Can you touch on that, and why do you think that that's been the case?
So the LIHTC pricing is an interesting animal. It's very much not efficient when it comes to the markets, and it depends where you are. If you're not in the CRA markets, the pricing has moved quite a bit more. So the yields that the investors are looking have moved not lockstep, but in as where the perm loans have moved. Perm loans have gone up 300 basis points, and the LIHTC investors have gone up 50 basis points, maybe 100. So so we've gone down a couple of cents in pricing, whereas as you would suggest, with the interest rates going up that much, it should have gone down 10 cents. And I don't really know what the answer is. I mean, we kind of, you don't really want to ask. Yeah, but the pricing has been amazingly steady, and it's a long-term investment. And the banks, what I've seen with the banks, they look to how much is my cost of funds, and so long as it's not costing me money, I'll live with it. Sometimes if it costs you a little bit of money, they're very much not profit centers for the banks, though that's not all banks. Some of the banks, they look to it as a trade. And so it's just every different, depends really where you are. North New Jersey, you'll get the great pricing. Around Philadelphia, you get pretty good pricing. Somewhere in the middle, the pricing isn't as strong, but it still hasn't moved as much as one would think it would with the interest rates.
Right. And I guess, Larry, you could touch upon this with Kimmel. I'm very Jersey centric. I specialize in New Jersey. I love working in New Jersey. I've done almost all of my projects in New Jersey, but I know you guys work in other states. Can you speak about what you are seeing in other states as far as resources to get these deals done? Were they sort of lockstep with, are we lockstep with other states? And now that the pandemic's over, we're starting to see, production increase.
So we do a lot of work in New York, in Connecticut. We're working on a deal in Massachusetts now, but it's similar to what Kimmel's saying. Anywhere where there's a strong CRA market, the syndication community and the banks and the upper tier investors still are throwing good numbers. When you get to far reaching, like in North New York State, sometimes in the North Country, we finished a deal in like Placid recently. We were working out in Western New York. Some of these markets, I agree with Kimmel, the interest, if it's not a CRA, goes way down, and you're looking at upper 80s, 86, 87, right, Kimmel, in some of these upper tier markets, upstate markets. But in states like Connecticut and New Jersey, where it's a strong market pretty much throughout the state, because the density is pretty high, especially in eastern Connecticut, in southern Mass, and in anywhere around the metro New York area. You're getting huge numbers, and that's it's all about where you need to select your deal at this point. Even in New Jersey, I mean, thankfully, New Jersey, there's strong markets, and the median incomes in most of the counties are very high. Yes, in the southern area where Sue is focused, southern counties, that the medians are slightly lower when you get away from Philly. But I think overall, New Jersey is blessed because the overall median incomes for the counties are strong. There's a strong interest in the upper tier investors to invest in these communities, and I think it's wonderful. So I think New Jersey is in good shape.
Thanks, Larry. I think Brian's going to jump in.
Yeah, we just do 4 poll questions. It's as part of the programming and for the continuing education credit. So I just wanted to have the first poll question pop up for the audience. That's okay. The question is, are you interested in learning more about low-income housing tax credit affordable housing policy in New Jersey? Interested, not interested, not applicable.
how this works? Does this?
Yeah, I think we're gonna cue the answers. And then we can move on to the next thing, but Lindsay, I don't know if usually the answers show up, right?
Yep, I just leave it up for a few more moments to give people a chance.
Okay. And for the audience, anybody who doesn't know, LIHTC abbreviated as Low Income Housing Tax Credit, and CRA abbreviated as Community Reinvestment Act. Cool.
All right, 76% interested in tax credit housing policy.
Okay, Samantha, I think we can keep going.
Great. So bringing up the topic of the low income housing tax credit program, it is a wonderful program, and I think I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it is how the majority of affordable housing gets developed in our country. And there is a bill to increase the tax credit program, and it has a ton of support, and it's been a bill that's been constantly reintroduced and to get the support that generated. Fingers crossed that they will get more tax credits out, because it is a wonderful program. And especially as we, in New Jersey, we see the settlement agreements that, I've read. We all know, so the 9% tax credit is a competitive program. It is very competitive. And most recently, the 2018 QAP, it was a 2017 or 2018 that we've utilized throughout the pandemic, has recently been there's been changes that have been proposed, and from everything that I've read so far, it looks like a lot of those changes will be accepted. What I think the greatest change to this QAP right now is that they are going to flip-flop the percentage of suburban and urban split. So it used to be a 60% suburban, 40% urban split on the 9% tax credit. And because now HMFA has come out with this wonderful production program for 4% projects to really, get these projects off the ground that are in town obligations. I think a lot of the urban development, which I focus predominantly on urban development, we're feeling a little, unloved, right? How do we get our projects done? So to see the agency really listen and take our comments and make some of these changes is really exciting. Erin, I'm going to sort of go back to you on this. I have one DCA project that I've been working on. That's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund through the DCA program. It's a very cool program for projects around 25 units or less. And do you think that program, and Larry, you may know a little bit more about this on that program. Do you see that program is going to change to allow a greater unit count to help fulfill some of the obligation that we have throughout New Jersey, or that program is so successful at the 25 units or less that they're going to keep it that way?
Oh, Larry, do you want to go first?
You want to
See
take
what
it, Larry?
think?
Yeah, look, I don't want to speak for DCA or Larissa or Angela Good, and they're been very receptive to all of the smaller deals that are coming in. But I mean, working with DCA for the last 25 years, and I know the Alpert Group has the same amount of time, and working with HMFA, they both each have their own separate areas. And I think DCA is looking to stick with these, from what I've heard, stick with these smaller transactions of 25 or less, because they already see the larger deals being funded by HMFA with different types of resources. And I think these resources are meant for those smaller, moderate-sized deals that still, a couple of those moderate-sized deals equal the larger deals. And the amount of money that DCA is putting per unit in makes these numbers really work. And these deals are a lot more nimble. I mean, it's much easier to do a DCA, deal with this fund than a 9% deal because of all the challenges of getting a 9% deal closed with Kimmel's funding, with construction lending from TD. I mean, these HMFA, these smaller DCA deals are nimble, and if you have the right site, they're easier to do. And quite frankly, I like the smaller deals being focused from DCA. I don't want the larger deals to be done. They'll bleed out the pot. And I think it's good use of the DCA's money, and it's a good split between HMFA and DCA. That's how I feel.
No, that's great. I definitely feel that way as well. And how are you funding? What are your other funding sources in a DCA deal? We're obviously, I don't think using the bigger lenders. You don't have tax credits. Is TD, would they be a financing partner in a DCA deal like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you can go up to 80% of median. So your median's a little higher. Your rents can be a little higher, right, Erin? I think you're able to mortgage more on your perm loan. So you need the right perm lender. We work with New Jersey Community Capital a lot, who are focused in the cities and some of the suburban communities, and they're a community lender that provide non-recourse, in many cases, non-recourse perm debt, similar to what HMFA would provide. So, we're very cautious. We don't want to sign, most of our perm debt is not recourse, that's just the way our business model is. But I think you can put a deal together because of the per unit caps that the DCA has on this trust fund monies. The numbers work, especially in counties where there's a high median income, where you can charge enough for rent to reach that 80%, 80% number or 60% number.
Right. And I think are you finding those deals have towns utilizing their trust fund as well?
Sure. I mean, when you have a town and they have an obligation, it's much easier for them to put $500,000 into a DCA deal than $2 million you need to bridge a gap on the 4%, production fund deals. I mean, we're working on a deal in Paramus now where we need almost $7 million of the COA of the trust fund money from Paramus to make the numbers work on a 120 unit deal in Bergen County. So it's very expensive, but I think the smaller deals that the asks are less because there's less units. And I think, generally, I think the numbers can work.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
just want to add, with using trust fund monies for these smaller projects, we have, and you'd mentioned before, Samantha, about the market to affordable programs, and that using those funds for things like that, where the townships have this money and they cannot use it for anything else. They can only use it for affordable housing development or, other supportive programs. So we are seeing with these smaller projects, especially with supportive housing, special needs housing, group homes, that kind of thing, with these, subsidies for $25,000 per bedroom, $30,000 per bedroom, and then each unit counts as one credit for the town. So they're more likely to be investing into these smaller projects it's basically they get more credits for a smaller amount. So combining that with the DCA money is definitely something that the towns are looking for, rather than these big, giant inclusionary or even 100% affordable projects that are over 100 units, where it's possible that the town doesn't even have the money to contribute to make it work for the developer.
Okay.
And I think Fair Share, as an organization, who's sort of the hammer that brought all this to us, we're at the development community, both for-profit and not-for-profit, are the tools to get it done. But I think what Erin is saying, I think especially in the supportive housing world, where we do a fair amount of that as well, there needed to be slight modifications to some of the local agreements when you're trying to figure out how to get production done. But so I want to also, going back to the theme of all the parties working together, both the development community, the HMFA, the DCA, the towns, and Fair Share. Fair Share is also coming to the table, and developers are learning to discuss, you know, with towns, along with Fair Share, on how to make deals work when they're not exactly working, meaning they need to make some changes to the agreements that Fair Share has. I think both Fair Share and the towns have become receptive to understanding that there is an obligation, that they need to meet it for the round 3, and that all parties need to sort of come to the table, and we're not all fighting with each other anymore. We're coming, I think that climate and the atmosphere is changing, and we're all learning how to work together and communicate with the funding from the DCA and the HMFA. So it's all working, and it's all very positive.
No, that's great, Larry. I love that. And that's exactly what I've been seeing as well. And HMFA as a partner, as a longtime partner in many deals, being able to get this money out and get it out quickly, you know, specifically when we've all dealt with, you know, labor shortages, people working from home, you know, the challenges that comes with that to get these programs out, and also trying to work through, you know, these challenges that we have on projects. And, you know, even, you know, I go back to, you know, when the pandemic first, you know, started, and there was a lot of discussion about how are the projects that are built, how are we going to deal with this, right? How do we, people breathing the same air, you know, what are these changes that we're going to have to do to our design of our buildings? So I do want to touch a little bit on that. And I think this is just for the group collectively. When the deal I had sort of when the pandemic first started, from a management perspective, I think it was a big collective sort of, oh my God, how are we going to handle this? Especially in, you know, projects that, you know, it's one building, you have multiple air handlers, you know, people are sharing the same air, and how do we deal with this? And our, you know, management companies, you know, really figured it out and provided the resources that they needed. But then we sort of, I saw a shift of, okay, for projects that are being developed right now, what are you going to do for the future dealing with pandemics? Larry and Sue, have you guys seen any changes in design in the way that units are constructed, or any other changes from a management perspective that you've seen post-pandemic?
Not in the design and the construction. We haven't made any changes. Our investors haven't requested it. HMFA, as far as I know, has, you know, tech services hasn't come out with any new guidelines to address that. I think from a management perspective, though, on how to actually, you know, boots on the ground, because we all lived through, and the management companies all lived through the experience of how to manage and the challenges of COVID for tenants. And, you know, that I think has changed, just the approach. But I think now with COVID easing, it's sort of easing out. So I don't see major changes in this area across the board, but it could be me. So Sue, what do you think?
I agree with you, Larry. I haven't seen or heard of any design type of changes. It really, with the construction, people I think have been more focused on the supply chain, making sure they can get in what they need, watching their costs on those supplies, but not necessarily anything with regards to the design.
I would agree. I don't think there's any room the dollars are so short to get the projects done, to add any further requirements. I don't see happening. I mean, there's always been there continues to be the push for environment or energy efficiency designs.
Right,
but
all electric. I think everything is going all electric at this point across the Northeast, at least. All the states and their QAPs are moving in that direction to go with all electric equipment, phasing out, gas, except for generators. And, I think there's going to be monies that are tied to that as well. So I think that's going to be coming in New Jersey, and I think New Jersey's, smart to do that. And I think it for property owners, it's a challenge because right now, and this is a snapshot, electric is much more expensive than gas at this point, and it's been that way for about a year and a half. But that may flip-flop, But right now, everyone's saying we should go all electric, but the challenge is that in the operations budgets, the electric costs more than gas. So that's just, where we are today. But I don't know if anyone else has anything to say about all electrification.
So Larry, when and I believe you had mentioned you do have a project utilizing the HMFA production fund, and with that specific funding, the energy requirements is the Zero Ready program. Are you finding that program is a much higher bar than a 9% energy program that you would select in the 9% tax credit, or is it pretty much in line with that?
Not that much more. It's just smart planning. It's, it's a couple bucks more. But if you have a good GC and you have good designers, the equipment that's coming out today for electric is efficient. It's much more efficient. It's getting down where you can use it in temperatures that get down to 0. It's not really an issue in New Jersey, but in some upstate and Northeast communities, it becomes an issue using all electric equipment, when it gets down to a certain temperature, but it's not an issue in New Jersey. But I think it's not that much more, and we're all doing it. And I always look at us in the development community, and the developers, both for-profit and not-for-profit, are the guinea pigs that the states wanted us to try everything out to see how it works, and it's working so far. So when you do an all-electric building and you can put a geothermal system in if you can afford it, and that's much more, I mean, your overall maintenance and operation costs of paying for that energy are going to be so much lower. But we have to get to that point where that becomes the norm. And I think all of the state agencies and all the QAPs you're seeing, including New Jersey, are slowly pushing us in that direction. That's where we're headed.
Right. And Kimmel, are you, do you have any projects that are utilizing the 45L credit now, the energy credit?
Most of our projects that's coming in, when we had to learn about it, and it was like nobody could quite understand it. You talk to the lawyers, nobody could give you very clean, straight answers to the accountants. But I think it does look like it works much like the energy credit at the end of the day.
So it brings in a couple bucks. I mean,
yeah, it's real money. So, but the real money comes. So I think it's $2,500 if you're not
prevailing
wage, and $5,000 if you are. Certainly, that shows you how much more money prevailing wage costs you, because you don't really care about the $2,500 if you can go with non-prevailing wage. But what I've learned in the past, everybody's been energy efficiency. We're going to do net zero, all the different things. This has been going on for years, and the hiccup has been, will anybody underwrite those lower energy costs? Because it's
right.
wonderful that you're projecting you won't have any. And I have found that now finally people are underwriting. If you can get an engineering study that says this is what it's going to cost you, then you'll get there. Which should work. That if you can project that the operating costs are lower, then you can finance the more expensive equipment and make it all work. Certainly, the ground source programs and things have been challenges. So we have a deal in I think it's in New York City where they're building ground source heat pumps going straight down in the ground underneath the building. So if it breaks,
Yeah,
I guess you're gonna hook to the grid, because you're never fixing something that's 50 feet below the
wow.
50 feet below a concrete structure.
But it's all.
But you're getting it done.
Yeah, it's all new, but I think the ground source heat pump, the tax credits for doing those are, make the 45L look small, because you can get a 30% credit plus another 10% for using domestic equipment. So you're off the bat, you're getting a 40% credit on the costs of those systems, which on a larger building, are a couple $1 million. And then if you can marry that to some funding source, like New York has a funding source, clean energy incentive dollars. So you can get like $25,000 a unit, and between that and the credit, it'll offset the costs of doing the ground source heat pumps. But if New Jersey, and I've talked to HMFA about this, New Jersey should go in that direction. It doesn't work on its own, but if you get a little push with a little other funding source from a clean energy program, other than from the state funds, ground source heat pumps designed properly can become the norm in all of our buildings.
And
Interesting.
so that's a question of how do you finance it? Because in the long run, it's certainly going to be better for all the projects and running forward, and for the environment which we are all living in.
Right. No, interesting. That's great. I didn't know about that. Brian, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in with another poll question. Lindsay, if you could. Yeah, awesome. The poll question is about special needs housing. Do you think there's a lack of special needs housing in New Jersey? Yes, no? Depends on where a person is located in the state.
I'll just leave it up for a minute and then share the results.
Right. So 78% think there's a lack of special needs housing in New Jersey. And I think you just have to, I think all of us have, friends and family that are on long waiting lists for special needs housing. And, the Alpert Group, we have a couple special needs projects where we've utilized the 9% program, the set aside where 25% of your project is special needs, and the demand for the special needs housing. I would like to touch upon that also, and what we're seeing in the special needs and development, and are those projects getting done, and what funding sources are there for getting the special needs done, besides the 9% tax credit program. And I have to say, this is something that I've learned a lot about since I've joined the Alpert Group. I always, see, group homes and, very specialized, special needs housing. I was not really aware of, the concept of really mixing it throughout, right? And there's been, I think, it's wonderful to see, and the couple projects that we have here, the special needs units are mixed throughout, and the services that we bring to those residents, we partner with organizations like Catholic Charities and YMCA, and they do such a wonderful job. But it clearly there isn't enough special needs housing. How do we solve that problem? I mean, pre-pandemic, it was bad, and now post-pandemic, it's even worse. And is it the money? Larry, do you see that too? Are you seeing special needs projects get done?
I think I think in New Jersey, we're very fortunate. And going back to Senator/Governor Cody, he created this special needs trust fund for HMFA, and then it became sort of permanent. And what that HMFA for supportive housing in their deals puts now, it used to be $100,000 a unit, now it's $150,000 a unit in capital dollars. And that money doesn't trigger the prevailing wage if it goes in during the construction. Why, I don't know. So I'm going to leave that one alone. But there is a resource, and New Jersey has been on the forefront of putting of creating supportive housing, mixed housing between workforce and seniors and with special needs clients. And we do a lot of it at Regan Development. We like working with DDD. We've done, we were the first for-profit developers to develop supportive housing with HMFA using the HMFA funding sources. And this was going back like 15 years ago when Yurgu and Pam McCrory were running the supportive housing program, which was, great. But HMFA has come a long way, and $150,000 a unit. I mean, we're talking about this deal we're working on in Paramus. We have a commitment for 30 DDD units. I mean, that's a lot of money. It's
Wow.
Get up to $4 million max of special needs trust fund money from HMFA. It helps bridge that gap on these production fund deals to compare the supportive housing special needs trust fund with the other sources that are coming from the the special needs trust, the affordable housing trust funds from the communities, from the towns themselves. So it's a mix and match on how to put a deal together, and that's how we figure out how to make sources meet uses by using all of these other resources. We like doing the special needs housing, and we think it's important to integrate those populations into the regular LIHTC buildings. But the resources available in New Jersey, Samantha, are there. They're there. So we just have to use them, and we need to educate the communities that these populations aren't going to be a challenge to these communities like a NIMBY challenge. They're not. If you pair yourself with the right not-for-profit service partner, which is absolutely necessary, and that service partner and the whatever the funding source from whatever special needs group you're working with, you have to have it paired with rental assistance. So you can't just bring a special needs population to the table to an HMFA deal. That special needs population for those units need rental assistance for a 30-year stream of rental assistance, so that the HMFA multifamily division can underwrite the deal with the resources and the revenues. So it's a challenge. You have to not only get the monies from the trust fund, but you need the rental assistance and the blessings of the communities to make them work.
And Larry, the DDD, the vouchers with DDD, what is the, are they specific on what special needs they will?
Well, the DDD is IDD population. It's those individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD. But there's DMHAS, which is more of a mental health population. And those, that's SMH, severe mental illness, SMI. That's a different population, and we work with them as well to provide that same funding stream and rental assistance. Without the rental assistance piece, the HMFA will not underwrite those supportive housing units, and they won't give you the special needs trust fund. So the developers, both for-profit and not-for-profit, have to put everything together with their supportive housing not-for-profit partner, service partner.
Okay. And Erin, and the settlement agreements, I definitely have come across group homes that are planned. Do group homes get a bonus point or no? Is that on a settlement agreement?
So all of the special needs, as long as they're meeting the requirements, that to be permanent supportive housing. So it has to be more than 6 months for a lease, ideally a year. They have to follow specific affirmative marketing requirements, the same as anybody else. If it would come off a DDD list, then there's, DDD kind of handles it and it's better for everybody. They, do the income qualifications, they handle the waiting list, they get everybody there. So from a municipal perspective, having these are considered very low income units. So there is a specific requirement for each municipality to have a certain percentage of very low income units. So this kind of helps double down on the credits of getting your very low income units. But then if there's also a specific supportive housing requirement, which some towns have, and that's part of their plan, is to have a certain amount of, special needs units, then it's kind of helping them in both ways, trying to complete their obligations.
Right. And I've never utilized it, but I'm also familiar with HMFA's Money Follows the Person program. Larry, have you utilized that? And that's a capital
Yeah.
source of funding.
Yeah, so that's a source that my brother Ken, it's near and dear to his heart to work with HMFA and a working group to put together. So we use it on every project. We don't do a lot of units. We do like 3 or 4, and those units, that money goes for all of those cutting edge technologies that go into a supportive housing rental unit that a normal LIHTC unit household family individual wouldn't have. So those bells and whistles, like if you're working with a DDD or a handicap individual household, automatic door openers, certain climate control issues, stove controls, different audio visual controls. And my brother Ken really is on the cutting edge of this is what he does on a regular basis on the supportive housing side. But that's where that money goes, and it provides a little bit of additional monies for those supportive housing populations that really need it.
And is that a funding source that can be utilized with the DCA 25 unit or less program? Can you use that, or it has to be an HMFA finance project?
You know what? We haven't broached that question. We've just used it, every HMFA deal we do, we just throw in a couple extra because they come and they want, they're advocates to get that money out the door. But I don't know if traditionally the HMFA funds and the DCA funds don't mix. So again,
right,
that's a question that might be an interesting exception, but I don't know the answer to the question.
Right. Okay. So that was good to touch upon special needs, and Larry, the organizations that you work with to provide special needs services, do you have a relationship with 1 or 2 providers, or do you work with providers? Is it location dependent on your projects?
So it's location dependent because the service providers are only regional, most of them. They're not statewide. And even on a project, let's say, like we're taking this 30 units as an example in Paramus, or we have in Little Ferry, we have DDD for, we have DDD in Little Ferry for, I think, 18 or 15 units. And then we have another 11 SMI because that was a special needs set aside in the special needs cycle. But even in these, let's say the Little Ferry deal where there's 15 or 16 apartments that are set aside for DDD, we have 3 providers because it's so specific in DDD. each of these organizations need to pull from people who are near the project. Someone in the Philly region or South Jersey isn't going to come up to Bergen County to live. Yes, maybe they'll move from Passaic to Bergen or from Union to Middlesex, but they're not these, people need to stay close to where they are. So we're finding we need to work with multiple not-for-profit social service organizations, even on a single project. And in the Little Ferry deal, we're putting in 3 separate supportive housing offices, for each of the 3 providers for the units that we're renting, because we always have a office for the social service agency in each building. We think it's good practice, and it's important to keep that management flow between the supportive housing population units and the LIHTC units.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Larry. Brian, I think you wanted to jump in with a poll question.
Yeah, Lindsay, if you could cue the next one up. This may have been answered already by Larry, but has the state affordable housing development funding options increased post-pandemic to help bridge the gap created by rising construction costs and interest rates? Yes, no, it depends on the type of project seeking funding. Just give it a minute. Interesting. Okay.
Okay, sort of, 50% yes, but 41%, it depends on the type of project seeking funding. And I would say, to touch on what, my experience has been with tax credit projects, HMFA and the state did a wonderful job, quickly getting that funding out, the gap funding specifically for 9% projects that, were stopped. I mean, there were projects that were under construction that actually were in big trouble because they had to deal with construction cost increases. And, I think, some people look at it, well, you have a construction contract, you have a guaranteed max price. What happened, right? And well, we know what happened, right? The material delays really was, I think, one of the biggest issues that we saw on the construction side, and then the construction costs. It was interesting. I think the lumber and Sue, I'd love to get your thoughts on what you're seeing now. I know it seems lumber has sort of come down. Obviously not. I don't think anything is going to ever get as low as it was before the pandemic, but it's come down quite a bit. But I have to say, I've just penciled out a couple projects now, and I'm getting construction bids in. And even, just an open shop job slab on grade is coming in somewhere between, $200 to $220 a square foot. Before the pandemic, that was somewhere between 150 and 180, right? So that's a big jump. And I don't see that getting any better. For years to come, I guess, and Sue, you work with a lot of clients, obviously not just us. So what are you seeing now post-pandemic with construction costs and delays?
Sure. So as you said, that was really the big concern right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has shifted. One of the big concerns, it seems like, and a lot of our developers are having trouble with electrical components and panels and things of that nature. They're ordering them a year in advance and then being told, oh, it's going to be even longer. So then they're looking for alternatives, which then sometimes requires them to change their scope, which then requires the architect to get involved, which increased the cost, and typically whatever the alternative, supplies are costs more too. So of course that's, a concern for everyone. I admit our developers have been on top of it, and it has worked out in every case. But again, it's still the concern, and even the concern of getting supplies in or locking prices in case there is a surge in price. So TD has increased our stored material maximums for our clients. We'll ask them, we'll say, do you think X amount is going to be sufficient? And we can always go back to risk and get, more approved, but we try to put in the loan agreement what our developers think they need, because we are getting a lot of people, purchasing ahead of time, or at least putting deposits down to try to avoid those same types of issues that we've had in the past. So, and then with timing, you had mentioned, yes, construction has taken longer. A few years, before the pandemic, very rarely did someone need to use their extension options built into their loan documents, which was fine. They're there, you only pay for it if you use them. But over the last year, almost every one of my projects has used their extension options, which again is fine. It's terrible because they, the developers have to pay the fee, and then they're paying more on interest, and then the rates have gone up, so that interest cost is more than anybody would have thought. But so I think on new deals, we're also trying to look at the extension options and make sure that we are putting into the documents what we think is needed, and work with the developer to make sure everybody's comfortable. And again, nothing's paid unless those options are used. So it's just there in case it's needed. I'm sure Larry could probably talk all day about this particular topic too.
Yeah, I think just to cut to the chase, I think, globally, I think, lumber's available now at a lower price, trusses where we couldn't get them before at all. I think the big ticket item is transformers. I think it's the electrical service and equipment, and I think, some of the HVAC parts, but overall it's transformers. I think the development community across the board is clamoring, and we keep our fingers crossed, because it's not something we can control. It's coming in from the utility, and you could wait an extra 6 months or a year. I've heard deals that are ready, gotten a CO, but for the transformer, and they're still waiting. So I think that's the big ticket. That's the item that continues to be the thorn in the development community side.
I've understand people, as soon as they close, or in some cases before they've closed, they've ordered their switch units and
Switchgear, transformer.
Yeah, the switchgear. That's exactly what I was going to touch upon. We just had a deal where they said, something crazy like 24 months, and but we could pay a fee to expedite it, right? So and to Sue's point, looking at some of the other options, but a transformer is a transformer. I mean, there's not a lot of options when you need a transformer, right? And I am curious, do we see that it seems like it is across the board for all utility providers, right? It's not just, PC&G versus Jersey, Central. It does definitely, it's nationwide. Okay. Yeah, no, it sounded like that was what our experience is. And on the construction costs, going back to that, Kimmel, and timing delays, on a tax credit project, timing is very important, right? You're making a commitment with your credits to investors.
Our pricing not moving. We want our credits when we want our credits, and,
right.
And if you don't deliver them, so right, delays cost you interest and adjusters.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about adjusters for folks that aren't familiar with how that works?
So there are two different types of adjusters. One is volume adjusters, and if you have a bond deal, the more money you spend, you actually get more tax credits you get. Or downward adjusters, which you don't really usually see in volume, which is if you spend less money, you get less tax credits. It's pretty simple math. With timing adjusters, however, there's usually a penalty of 55 or 60 cents per credit for the first year credit that we don't receive them. It's a steep discount. And the reason why that is because the credit that we don't get in 2023, we're really not getting until 2033 because it's a 10-year delay. Because all the credits that were promised in 2024, you've already promised them and we already have that in our map. So that's why it's such a steep penalty. And depending on how how much your equity is bridged, there's really not much movement or ability for the tax credit investor to give you a break on the adjusters. And we have seen significant problems where things are delayed 6 months and you don't end up with credits for the whole year because of that. So
Right.
it's been pretty expensive and with regards to that.
Right. So I think, in the development community, we were really excited, when the IRS had put out, the placed in service deadline extensions. I mean, that's huge. I mean, you butt up against your placed in service deadlines. I mean, that.
Right. That's the end of the world, everybody.
Right. But the flip side of that is, we've all had to deal with, on delays, dealing with the timing adjusters. But I know again, to Larry's point and Sue's point about, all coming together and really trying to figure out, how to, tap every funding source there is to make these deals whole. One of the things that I'm seeing out of the agency as well is in the new QAP, they are going to increase the hardship credit that you're allowed to ask for. That cap has previously been, I think, 100,000, and it's going to go up to 150. And that's wonderful. I think the penalty they are, though, put then sort of on the other side, putting a penalty that if you do take a hardship credit, you'll have to sit out around whatever that next upcoming 9% tax credit round. So that's really tough. But if you have a deal where you're having these adjusters, I don't know that
goes to a volume, which is where I started to say volume and timing. And so often if you're able to go in for more credits on a 4% deal, we build in a cushion because you can get more credits. But in the past, a 9% credits, you got $1.5 million in credits, and that's how much you're delivering, and you're not getting any more. And then the hardship credits come in. And so what happens is, particularly in proprietary fund transactions, which is what Hudson generally does, which is where you have a single investor within your fund. There are limits as to how much money they want to invest. And really, it's a commitment. It's more of a commitment thing than actually being able to invest. So if it's $1 million increase and it was a $10 million, $100,000 a year in credits, it's $1 million in credits over the 10-year stream. So if your investment goes up by $1 million, that may be 10% of your total amount. And we may have allowed it 5%. So it's a question of going back to the investor and finding out, does the investor still have need and will they want to invest? And what happens is, and generally they do, you want to have a cap because nobody wants to have on their books an unlimited commitment for funds. And I think that's certainly an understandable thing. But we've not run into a problem where the investor hasn't bought, but there are provisions whereby if the investor decided they were only going to buy $5 million of those credits, $50,000 of the credits a year, that you would adjust the partnership ownership percentage back to the general partner, and they would receive those credits, so that the credits aren't lost; they go to somebody. But we haven't really seen that happen, and I often hear people say, well, I want to buy the credits myself, or I have somebody who wants to buy the credits, and the answer is the returns are very low, and if you don't know that you're going to have income for the next 10 years, it's hard to be putting out money at 3 or 4% after tax I don't think too many
Sure.
people that have that kind of income, they can find better places to put their money, and it's highly illiquid, particularly if you're an individual.
Interesting. No, that was great. Thank you, Kimmel. And Sue, just to go back to timing, are you now on a construction loan? Are you with your extensions? Are you guys trying to build in more cushion or more extensions when you're signing up construction loans? Has that changed for you?
Not necessarily. We look at how long the deal is supposed to take to build, and then build cushion in for the initial maturity, and then talk to the client and determine. Typically, it's 1 6-month extension option that's really sufficient to give a little more, even extra cushion for completion, and then to get to stabilization. On a few, we've done 2 6-month extension options, but those have been, essentially we'll talk to the clients and see what really makes sense, and then go from there.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm
And do
sorry.
go ahead.
This is Brian, we're just gonna, I just wanted to, Lindsay let me know that we should move at this point probably to the Q&A questions, just so we have enough time to wrap up before 11:30.
Oh, that's great, Brian.
So I can read the questions, and then Samantha, if you want to sort of facilitate who might be best to respond, we go from there. So the first question is, what is DCA paying per unit through the Housing Trust Fund? And I don't know if anyone knows this offhand, but generally I think they fund maximum is $6 million for 25 units, which is about $240,000 a unit. But go ahead if other folks have more, practical knowledge.
Right. I'm not sure they have a limit per unit, right, Brian? I think it's just that cap, and what I think that telegraphs to all of us is they're being flexible.
Right.
And I think, DCA and flexible have not always gone together over the course of, the last 30 years, but I think this is a wonderful trend. I think they want to get this money out the door, and I think, they're doing it successfully now. And I think not having a per unit cap is really wonderful. So that's what I have to say.
Yeah, that's been my experiences. So that makes sense. The next question is from Christine Hoffman. ADA and energy building code changes took effect May 5th on construction unless project was previously permitted. Does anybody have any experience implementing these ADA and energy building code changes? I know I've talked to Samantha about this sort of separately, but I don't know if the panel has any thoughts on that.
I think we, from the development community, our architects, we worked really hard to get our plans into building departments. But it was like March 6th was the deadline for this, code change. And, we worked really hard to do that. I think it is going to be what I am hearing, some of the challenges that we are dealing with on the design to meet a lot of these code changes is tough. From an energy perspective, to Larry's point earlier about being the guinea pig, affordable housing developers and our projects, the restrictions and requirements that we have from an energy standpoint is way above what any market rate developer would have to do. And I think that when we submit our plans to the building departments, and I think we have it just a little bit, I would say, better in that sense, because we do have to meet a lot of these other funding requirements. But also, what I am hearing my engineers talk about is the stormwater. That has been very, very challenging to meet these requirements. And we have projects in our pipeline that we had to go back and look at and say, what, this might not work. Because managing the stormwater is difficult, especially in urban areas. I mean, it's not that easy in suburban areas, but it's definitely been a challenge. Brian, next question. Unless anybody on the board had any, or panel had any thoughts on that. Oh, keep going, Brian.
Yeah, so the next question is from Mary Beth Lonergan. What entities are providing the rental assistance vouchers? I think Larry
Great
touched on this
question.
a little bit, but go ahead.
Great question. I think Larry touched on a lot of that. Rental assistance is tough. I think, Larry, you're utilizing DDD for vouchers.
Yeah, DDD and Mary Beth, hey, how are you? DDD is, we work directly with them through the agencies, but we sort of get our commitment letter directly from DDD, and Sherry Fine is a wonderful staff person we've been working with for 20 years at DDD, and she links us. She always, we use her as a resource to find the right supportive, special needs agencies to work with in the areas where we're working, because as I mentioned, it's more than one and typically on each project. And then DMHAS, they'll also provide commitment letters to a development directly as well. So those are most of the agencies we've been working with. There are certainly other rental resource streams, but those are the two we typically work with in New Jersey.
Yeah, and I would say housing authorities have been a great resource, but they don't have a lot of vouchers to give out. I try to stay up to speed when I see housing authorities put out RFPs for vouchers, because it can be very, very specific, the number that they have, and whether it's for existing or new construction. They all housing authorities have their target for what they're looking to put their vouchers in, and that's starting to be very competitive as well. And also what I'm seeing is special needs, housing authorities wanting to give their vouchers to special needs projects. And I'm also seeing the home funds, the different organizations, counties that are giving out home funds in those RFPs that come out, and what they're asking you to, the point system is, are you providing supportive housing or special needs in your development? So I think that, speaking of special needs, that's helpful. I don't know, we answered that question, Mary Beth. It's so tough to find vouchers these days. And I think as, an organization, Affordable Housing Professional New Jersey, if we find out those resources, we will share them as we find out.
Okay, so I'll go to the next question, which is from an anonymous attendee. Are there support service requirements for senior housing developments? If so, where can we find this information, and who do they tend to partner with?
That's a great question. Definitely LIHTC, 9% LIHTC projects, when you're competing, in the senior cycle, it's sort of twofold. You can, go after the points where you do, 5% or 5 units at special needs, and you could sort of do a homeless, or you could do some of the other special needs categories. But there's also the aging services that are provided to senior housing populations, and typically, like, we have projects that we partner with, and Larry, I'm sure the organizations you partner with can provide those services, and it really is population driven. What we have come to find, a senior building in an urban area versus a suburban area, when you get into those buildings and what you think that population, what you're going to bring to them, is not always what they need. So you really have to be cognizant of your population. Definitely, I would say, if you're looking for the information, a good resource would be HMFA, their website. You could go through their
The QAP as well. The QAP has specific listings. Like if you're going into the senior cycle, you have to provide, transportation. I think if you look at the QAP in the senior cycle set aside, it'll give you all the requirements that need to come with a LIHTC deal looking to house seniors.
Right. And on a 4% production fund, if you're utilizing the production fund, I believe there is a requirement on that program to provide special needs as well. I think 5 units or 5% for special needs as well. So you could find those guidelines on the HMFA website.
And I think, Erin, you could probably just touch on this for a brief minute. Like there is a township need for special needs and senior based on, I know we talked about this a little bit, right? From a planning perspective?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the settlement agreement is in the plan, there's a cap on how many senior units each municipality can have. But as far as like supportive services for the senior developments, there are, as was mentioned before, there's new ADA requirements, stuff like that. As far as what the towns can provide as far as support, I mean, additional funding for retrofitting buildings, ramps and that kind of thing. That's about what's available. I'm trying to think of where you could find information. I mean, everything would be in the township's plan. So if you're going to propose a new senior development, making sure that they haven't already reached their cap is a good before you propose something new.
Cool.
The counties are a great resource too. I think counties, division, have a division of aging or division of health services. I find are a great resource too.
And the last question, sorry, I'm just jumping in because we have a minute left, but what are panelists seeing as the average square foot construction cost today? I think Samantha, you touched on this a little bit. Larry mentioned it, but if you guys could just briefly touch on that, and then we have a survey and we can, wrap up.
Yeah, I think just, 215 to 230, depending on the region, and is it, urban and, what county in New Jersey. So we're seeing things about 25 to 30% higher than pre-COVID with everything. And I agree with Samantha, it's just not going back to where it was. It's just not. It's tough. And this is just the new normal, and that's it.
Yeah, the pricing when the pricing for lumber went down, nobody gave, they said, okay, well, we're going to make it up someplace else. So you didn't get any break.
That's right. The new normal, right? The new normal.
New normal. Yeah. Well, Lindsay, I think thank you guys so much for participating in this, and thank you for the audience for the questions and for the participation. We really appreciate everyone's time today.
As I end the seminar, you will see a survey appear on your screen. Please give that a moment to appear and take the survey so that we can have your feedback about this webinar and what we might do in the future. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and thank you to our panelists. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.